Hey again everyone, I'm Mason White, a composer. I mentioned in my previous composer deep dive on Ryota Kazuka that I was thinking about covering Yasunori Mitsuda next, but I've ended up deciding to tackle one of my all-time favourite composers instead, that being the great Yoko Shimomura. If you're familiar with RPGs as a genre, you've more than likely heard some of her incredible music before, whether you realise it or not. So just like in my previous videos, I'm going to do a deep dive into her iconic style with all its different intricacies and such, and then put it all into practice by creating a brand new track with what we learn. But first, let me quickly and shamelessly plug myself. As I said, I'm a composer for all sorts of different media, primarily video games. I'm always open to commissions, so please contact me if you're ever in need of a composer for your project, big or small. I've worked in many genres and with some very talented people over the years, so please reach out. Alright, enough of that. Let's get into the legendary legacy of Yoko Shimomura. While you might associate her with RPGs, she first got her start in game music in the late 80s with Capcom of all companies, most notably contributing music to Final Fight and Street Fighter II. In 1993, however, she began working at Squaresoft. She provided music for the likes of Front Mission, Live Alive, Super Mario RPG, Parasite Eve, Legend of Mana, and of course, Kingdom Hearts. She left Square in late 2002 to go freelance, but has developed such a unique style ever since that you can hear forming over those early years. Since then, she's had such a huge hand in a ton of series and games such as Kingdom Hearts, Mario & Luigi, Xenoblade Chronicles, Radiant Historia, Final Fantasy 15, among a wealth of others, much more than I can list or tackle. I haven't heard absolutely every soundtrack that she's worked on, and I'm willing to bet that you haven't either. Well, I don't know, maybe you have, in which case, I'm sorry, but her entire legacy is too huge to cover in one video, so I'm going to stick primarily with what I've heard over the many, many years I've experienced her work. That means really honing in on her style and defining what that means. It's primarily an orchestral sound, utilising various different sections of a full orchestra. That means that depending on the track, we're going to hear strings, woodwinds, brass, percussion, etc. But there are a few key solo instruments that Shimomura focuses on that make up a big portion of her musical identity. These being the solo violin, marimba, and of course, the piano. She really began to focus on this sound starting with Legend of Mana for PlayStation in 1999, so that's going to be the furthest back that I'll be looking at. And while I desperately want to be able to talk about something like Parasite Eve's soundtrack, that sadly doesn't fit into the style that I'm talking about here, so I unfortunately have to leave it out. This video is going to be similar to my previous composer analyses, so I'm not going to go super heavy into the music theory side of things. I will when I need to, but there are several videos out there that can and will do a better job of articulating specific theory on Shimomura alone. So for this tutorial, I want to lean into my strengths as an arranger. But let me get a bit more specific about the style that I'm referring to, because in terms of sound palette, it's all fairly similar and easily defined. Compositionally, however, it is much broader and not very rigid. There is such a wide emotional range in Shimomura's work, meaning that you'll hear anything from some upbeat, goofy and light-hearted tracks that aren't very serious at all to, songs to score the end of the world. This isn't even exclusively depending on the tone of each individual game either. Any of her projects will feature tracks across this entire spectrum. Obviously, that's not a trait exclusive to Shimomura, but it is a clear indicator of her incredible diversity as a composer, as she nails each tone so well. It's going to be pretty tough, but I'm aiming to capture a pretty wide range of this spectrum for the final track. I would advise against it for your own work though, as Shimomura often picks a tone and sticks with it. So on one end of this spectrum, we've got the very light-hearted, not too serious side of her style. Think of something like Mystic City Geo, or Working Together. On this side of things, expect to hear some very upbeat woodwinds, fun melodies, a wealth of major chords and intervals, and expect it to play early on in the game, always outside of a serious situation. So think your early area battle themes, big towns and the like. While it may not be what most would consider her absolute greatest work, it is such a core pillar of her style that it is instantly recognisable as soon as you hear it. There have been too many times where I've heard one of these tracks outside of a game and thought, man, there's not a chance in hell this isn't by Yoko Shimomura, that's gotta be her. So I'm definitely going to incorporate this type of style into the final track. A little bit more iconic to her style are some of the more melancholic and softer tracks, usually playing in the more heartfelt moments or for something very somber. Think Tears of the Light, Tenebrae, and of course, Dearly Beloved. Some of Shimomura's most popular tracks fall under this part of her style, so it's arguably the most recognisable. Expect to hear a strong focus on the piano, strings, or even a solo violin. You might hear some softer sounding instruments as well, like a glockenspiel or a music box. These tracks are very slow and melodic in nature, and are usually lacking any percussion at all. Sort of an offshoot to this, however, are what I like to call melancholic area tracks. These are tonally similar to her somber tracks, but are designed for field themes. Think of tracks like Cavern of Remembrance, or Dreamy Somnom Labyrinth. Bit more drive and intensity than her soft tracks, and aren't afraid to get loud and climactic. There's plenty of percussion to maintain that drive while still featuring melancholic melodies and harmonies. My personal favourite side of her style, however, are the bombastic and epic themes, usually for serious boss fights or cutscenes. Examples include Apocalypsis Noctis, Unfinished Business. I'm sure you're more than familiar with a lot of these themes. They always sound like the fate of the world is on the line, so expect to hear strings, brass, choirs, booming percussion, and of course, you can expect to hear piano at the forefront of it all. Maybe the sound palette isn't the most unique out there, but it doesn't have to be. Even the chord progressions keep it nice and simple, but still epic, ensuring that we hit the flat six and tonic at different points. Arguably the most important part of all this though is a strong melody over the top, usually on the high strings, piano, or sometimes both at once. Shimomura's style is incredibly melody focused overall, and that especially applies here. So we aren't looking to make things overly complex in terms of music theory. We're going to keep things simple but incredibly effective, as Shimomura would. So that's 4 different core pillars of her style. Most of her work can fall into one or more of these, but this obviously isn't everything that makes up her style. So I'll be referring back to these as a rough guide, but not as strict categories. So now I want to break down some of the most common instruments that Yoko Shimomura uses. Many of these are played in orchestras, so in those cases, instead of talking about an instrument individually, I'm going to refer to a section as a whole. So instead of flutes and clarinets, I'm going to talk about woodwinds. Unlike my previous tutorials, I'm not going to mention any specific sound sources like synths or sound banks. This is because Shimomura's rotation of equipment changes with just about every project, so it's kind of useless to mention any in particular. If you are still looking for a particular sound though, you can find plenty of sound sources on the newer VGM sound sources spreadsheet, which I have linked in the description. And besides, much of her work over the past decade plus has been recorded with live instruments, so unless you specifically want to use the original Kingdom Hearts 2's awful sounding string sounds, I suggest you don't bother. Use any modern libraries that you want. The bulk of this style comes from the composition anyway. Pianos are probably the most single recognisable instrument of her style. The way they are written, techniques played, and how often they are used vary so greatly that it encompasses so much of her broad spectrum. They might be used strictly for melodies, like in Cavern of Remembrance, For counter melodies or embellishments like in Mountaintop Secrets. For ostinatos like in Edge of Existence. Or may be used for solo piano parts like in Destiny Islands. I want to mention pianos first because they are likely the first instrument that comes to mind when you think of her style. Don't hesitate to use these as much or as little as you feel when attempting to emulate her sound, but always attempt to make your piano sound as real as possible, as if they were played by a live pianist. I mean, if you can play keys yourself, then great, but if you're like the rest of us, you'll need to put some effort into how you program your pianos. That means making things sound human. Have some dynamic range, use a wide range of velocities, make sure you don't quantize everything so strictly, have things play a little loosely, etc. And sound-wise, make sure that your piano also sounds real in the first place. Play around with the sustain pedal or add some reverb to make things a little less dry. This is all info that doesn't just apply to Shimomura's style, by the way. I mean, if you want your pianos to sound more realistic in general, which you probably should, these are all great details to get there. As I said, compositionally, you have so much range to work with. Almost any sort of technique or focus you can think of related to piano, you can probably find an example of Shimomura using herself, so go nuts. Have some arpeggiated harmonies, freeform melodies, cluster chords, whatever. The golden rule above everything else though is to keep things sounding realistic and playable. Take care not to program something that can't be played live by a pianist. So think about your left and right hands and how much a pianist can realistically do at once. Also, I find that layering your melodies with octaves not only sounds great in general, but pushes the sound slightly further into Shimomura's style. It helps give more weight to each note. Now, if you don't think of piano straight away when it comes to Shimomura, you're probably thinking about some strings. Once again, there is a hell of a lot of variety here in how they can be utilised, not only in their role in a track, but also in the techniques used. And you can expect to hear them all over that emotional spectrum. I find that they are most often used for lead melodies, like in Sunset Waltz. But you'll also often hear them used for harmonies, like in Hometown. You can hear them played with a pizzicato technique, like in Forest Fairy Melody. Or for some strong staccato-based ostinatos, like in Unfinished Business. So as I said, there's a wide variety here. Sound-wise, things can get tricky. Obviously, Shimomura pretty cleanly transitioned from using virtual orchestral instruments to live ones as the music budgets for these games grew. The HD remix versions of Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 are the perfect examples of that transition. The original PS2 versions used virtual instruments for their orchestral needs. When they were redone for the HD remixes though, live instruments were mostly used instead. They were much more expensive for certain, but listen to the difference it makes. So, unless you want to intentionally recreate the very fake string sound, in which case, sure, whatever, that's your prerogative, you'll need to find a string library that can get you as close to a real sound as possible. And this can get pricey depending on where you look. But another piece of advice I have is to write around your string library's strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, I use Spitfire Audio's intimate and epic string libraries. They sound great when used for swelling, rich harmonies, but they have no attack control, meaning that they sound pretty awful when used for melodies with rapid legato notes. So I'm going to keep that in mind and try to avoid that weakness when writing. I highly encourage you to do the same, as it's going to save you a hell of a lot of headache later. Now, compositionally, how do we approach strings? This sort of depends on what part of the emotional spectrum we're aiming for and what role we want them to play. So if we want them to play a climactic lead part, we'll need to write a melancholic but powerful and memorable melody like in Edge of Existence. Or if we want them to back up the lead instrument with some nice harmonies, we'll need to write some thicker and softer parts, like in Wildness and Toughness. Feel free to utilise different techniques as well, most notably the aforementioned staccato or pizzicato styles. A solo violin, or sometimes a cello, is one of the most common instruments Shimomura uses for a lead. I noticed she really started to use it heavily in releases from about 2010 onwards. Oftentimes it will be a virtual instrument, usually the same one, being the solo violin legato vibrato patch from East West Symphonic Orchestra Library. Even as early as something like Birth by Sleep, however, she was starting to incorporate live performances in place of a virtual one, so I would recommend trying for as realistic of a solo violin sound as you can. So search around for a decent library, but be aware it is a stringed instrument, meaning the live performance will always sound much, much better. So if you can manage, I would recommend finding a violinist and commissioning them instead. It is definitely way less pricey for a solo musician than a full string section, so it's a bit more feasible here, and it makes a world of difference too. As I said, these solo violins are pretty much exclusively used as a lead instrument, so try to make sure that yours is playing the lead melody. If there are any accompanying parts for strings, Shimomura would never really use a solo violin, just a full section. So follow suit and have it be at the forefront of your track whenever it's playing, strong melody and toe. It's worth naming this section as percussion instead of drums as a whole. We're primarily looking at an orchestral sound, so drum kits are kind of a rarity for Shimomura. Not always, but we're focusing on an orchestral kit instead. This means timpanis, snares, bass drums, tambourines, triangles, rolling cymbal crescendos, the works really. Just about anything that falls under that umbrella. Now don't expect to use all of it in one track. The orchestral sound can already get pretty muddy with everything going on, so try to be sparing with the percussion in this case. Just listening to your average Shimomura track, it's pretty clear that the percussion is rarely ever the main focus. Take a listen to Crisis of the Red and Green, or La Cloche. Percussion is one of the easiest parts of music to get sounding realistic with samples, so I don't have much advice to give in this case. As percussion is rarely ever her main focus, it isn't too hard to write for. She tends to write what I call percussion floors, meaning that she will create a rhythm floor with a few different percussion pieces and use that for most of the track. That's not to say that the floor itself isn't very interesting, there is usually just some low variety. That's okay in these cases though, because there will always be plenty of variation in the melodic and harmonic side of things to make up for it. That is the real focus of her work, so percussion tends to be more of a supporting element. In terms of what pieces to prioritise, that can vary, but I'd say that the timpani and snare are the most important parts, almost like a drum kit. That snare though is likely to be rolling often and played in a marching style. You'll need some smaller overhead, in quotation marks, elements as well. So play around with some triangle, tambourines, sleigh bells, etc. Just don't overdo them. It's worth mentioning too that Shimomura will sometimes have a 4 on the floor electric kick drum playing in certain tracks, like Come On. You'll hear this more in the less important battle themes, and sometimes is layered underneath some orchestral percussion. Strictly orchestral percussion can lack some oomph of a kick drum in a recorded setting, so I would assume that's why Shimomura tends to use these. A strangely prominent instrument you'll find her use is the marimba of all things. You can expect to hear this in her lighter soundtracks, particularly in the Mario and Luigi games. I assume that this is a holdover from Super Mario RPG, as she used it there plenty as well. This isn't exclusive to the Mario RPGs though. You'll find this on the light-hearted side of the emotional spectrum, maybe sometimes in a melancholic area theme as well. Have a listen to Challenging Actions and Rowdy Rumble. It's such a big giveaway as to whether or not Shimomura was in charge of a track. Obviously it doesn't always make an appearance, but it's so prevalent they would absolutely call it a core pillar of her style. Compositionally, I find that it isn't usually the lead instrument, but it might be layered with the main lead. She tends to write them as either counter melodies or supporting harmonies. She will very often utilise trills with the marimba, even during some of her melodies. An obvious example that I can immediately think of is the opening of Dance to the Death. If you're going to use the marimba in your work, try to make sure to use trills as well. Even more importantly though, make sure to use different velocities. A live player isn't going to hit each bar with the exact same strength every time, so change it up to make it sound more realistic and less, wooden. Brass is a bit harder to define in this style. It's definitely there as a counter melody in plenty of tracks, but it's usually hard to notice it right away. It's rarely ever the lead instrument and is usually playing alongside something else. So think of something like Olympus Coliseum or Nvidia. It's usually there, but obviously in a supporting role, rather than something like strings or piano, which have a stronger focus. That being said, there tends to be a difference in how the trumpets are written compared to something like the French horns. I mean, that's pretty obvious. They tend to fill different roles in an orchestra anyway, but it's worth mentioning. Trumpets are going to stick out from the rest of the horns, so expect to hear them used as extra small counter melodies. When it comes to writing brass, try to follow suit and use it pretty exclusively for more background elements. I'd recommend using horns to fill in the mix alongside something else, sometimes as a melody, but more as a counter melody. Trumpets can fill the same role, but try to reserve them for stabs or what have you that stick out from everything else. Basically, try not to rely on brass very often, but your track might sound more complete with it. It's all in moderation though, just as Shimomura does it. We're talking about just about every piece of an orchestra here, and that means woodwinds. They show up decently often in Shimomura's style, primarily in area themes I find. Mostly though, just as a single instrument instead of the whole section. So you might expect to hear a clarinet like in Deep Castle, an oboe like in Melancholia, a bassoon like in A Walk in Andante, and of course, a flute, or sometimes pan flute, like in Sunny Driftwood Shore. They are usually in the more light-hearted tracks, but can show up on the more melancholic side of the spectrum as well. Of course, the more recent her works get, the more likely they are to use a live performance of a woodwind. I'd vote for trying to have yours sound as realistic as possible instead of trying to emulate an older virtual instrument. Shimomura usually places woodwind instruments in the leading melody role, not usually as a background element. That depends on the instrument, of course, so a contrabassoon probably isn't taking centre stage in an epic battle theme. Try writing a solid melody and have it played by a flute or an oboe. That's more than enough to match this style. Choirs are also a bit of a rarity in Shimomura's work, but do show up from time to time. When they do though, they are more than likely to be the main focus of a section, or even an entire track. Think of something like Sacred Moon, or Apocalypsis Aquarius. Their roles differ a bit between these two tracks, they are still arguably the primary focus of these examples. A choir will always make an orchestra sound even larger and give a piece more weight. So for that reason, you can expect to usually hear these on the epic or melancholic side of the emotional spectrum. And it goes without saying, but a choir is based on the human voice, so try to find a library that will actually sound like humans. In terms of writing for them, you kind of have a bit of free reign here. Shimomura could use these for a lead melody, but you might also hear it fill the same role as brass can, to fill out a mix and subtly make things sound larger. The aforementioned Sacred Moon track is a good example of a use case that does a bit of both. You could also go the route that Apocalypsis Aquarius does and have single syllables in Latin. That is a bit tougher, as not every choir library will carry those. If you want to go the full chorus singing in Latin approach, like in Destati, that is going to be much more difficult. You'll need an actual choir to sing those custom lyrics, so, it might be a bit tough. This is very much just a catch-all term, and not any specific instrument. We're talking about any sort of digital sound here, which there can be a fair amount of in Shimomura's style. The further back we go, the more obvious it is. The aforementioned Parasite Eve is extremely digital sounding, but once again, that falls just outside of the time period we're talking about. I mentioned the electric kick earlier, but I also noticed that Shimomura tends to have a droning pedal note on a sawtooth synth to fill out a mix. You can hear this in Time to Fight, and Macau Cow. You'll notice a rare combination of electric drums and some synth elements in Crystalline Chill. With all of these examples though, it's pretty plain to see just how sparsely she uses digital sounds. They are almost always in a supporting role, and are so rarely the main focus. They're super simple compositionally too, either a pretty standard drum pattern or even just a 4 on the floor pattern for the kick, long held notes for any synth, and very simple sound design otherwise. So my advice is to rarely use any synthetic elements in the first place. If you are going to use them, put them in a supporting role to help fill out the mix, and make sure that any synths you use are very simple waveforms. There are a few small extra quirks that I want to mention here as well. Shimomura's style can be pretty obvious when you hear it, and that doesn't just apply to the instruments used or melodies written. I wouldn't say that she follows a very strict structure in her work or anything, but there are a few commonalities that I do notice. A small extra instrument that I want to mention are her somewhat infrequent uses of orchestral hits. That's this sound. She sometimes uses this to accent a hit and deliver a little bit more impact than usual. It's a sound that isn't used so much anymore, mostly throughout the 90s, but I figured it was still worth mentioning. Many of her sections hover around one chord or so, or in many cases, the bass will stay around one note while the harmonies over the top may shift. Think of something like Your Dream Adventure. When she does this usually doesn't change until a new section. This section might also hang around one chord, but the chord itself is likely to be different from the preceding section. I often notice that she will move up a whole tone from the tonic when she wants a new section to have a bit more momentum. You can hear this in something like Rowdy Rumble, The Crazy Carriage. You'll actually be able to hear this quite often in her work, and I would say is pretty emblematic of her style. So if you have a first section hang around the tonic, then up the intensity in the next section and move up a whole tone, that will do a whole lot of heavy lifting in emulating her style. Shimomura also knows how to effectively bring out the weight and melancholy from the flat 6 chord. This is the epic and emotional chord in just about anything that uses it, so it goes a long way in some of her most powerful tracks. Don't just anticipate, but expect that you will hear it in both her melancholic area themes and her epic themes. It's a huge reason as to why they tick, and one of the biggest reasons they are so beloved. Here are a few examples. In some of her most impactful tracks, she will hold off on using the flat 6 for several sections, building anticipation, so that when you finally get to hear it, it hits hard. This is damn near essential for emulating the emotional side of her style, so make sure to use it in your track. The climaxes of many of her epic battle themes follow the 1, flat 7, flat 6 progression. This is a super common way to make your climax sound epic and isn't exclusive to her at all. But she does tend to use it very often, so keep it in mind. Alright, that was quite a lot of info, so I'm going to use what we found to create our track in her style. Now before anything else, it's important to figure out which side of the emotional spectrum I'm aiming for. Shimomura's tracks rarely if ever deviate from one side of it, so I would recommend doing the same. That being said, I want to try and represent as much as I can with my track, so I'm aiming to hit on both the light-hearted side as well as the epic battle theme side. That's gonna be pretty tough, but let's see how it goes. The intro here establishes which side of the emotional spectrum I'm aiming for at first, being the light-hearted side. So I've got a small ostinato on the pizzicato strings alongside the snare playing and accompanying rhythm. Very simple overall and not very high energy, just an establishing section before properly kicking things off. During the second half, I have some cellos playing staccato to accent the rhythm. After some orchestral hits to ease the transition, we move into the A section. The percussion picks up a bit more here, with an added timpani, triangle, and crash cymbals. Underneath this though, I've got a 4 on the floor pattern on an electric drum kick. It's not supposed to be super obvious, but everything together makes for a very Shimomura-esque percussion floor. As well as the continuing staccato strings, I've also got a very simple saw synth bass to fill in a bit of the low end, just playing the root 5th an octave. The melody over top of everything is on marimba, which gives everything a very Mario RPG sound. The melody is layered with fifths and incorporates a few trills here and there. I had to get pretty surgical with the velocities to make the trills sound decently natural. They sound better when mixed with everything else. It's a very light-hearted section overall. Now moving into the B section, I move up a whole tone, just as Shimomura tends to do. The percussion floor remains the same, and so does the overall rhythm. The chord progression changes up a bit here though. I was very careful not to hit the flat 6 just yet, as that's a bit too dark for this section and would rob the impact that it makes later. This chord progression is maintained by the strings, which now play an extra 5th, and by the returning synth bass. The main melody here is on the solo violin. I initially thought of using a virtual instrument, but I decided not to cheap out and had this part played by Nina Violin, who I've worked with several times before. She nailed this part as per usual, so please reach out to her if you need a great sounding violin recording. I've got a counter melody here on the French horns. This is not only to slightly increase the intensity of this section, but also to fill in the mix a bit more. The C section is just a small transition section. An orchestral hit marks the impact as we go back to just the snare, staccato patterns on piano, and a secret little organ playing a pedal note and octave. The overall purpose of this part is to sort of move back to neutral on the emotional spectrum and act as a bridge to the rest of the track. The D section is the shift into the epic battle side of the emotional spectrum, without going overboard just yet. This means no percussion, as we're building up the tension. The piano starts the section with an ascending line over the tonic and octave in the left hand. We're finally using the 1, flat 7, flat 6, flat 7 chord progression that Shimomura often uses, and the left hand is establishing it. The right hand is playing the melody and the octave above. This ensures that each note is a bit more powerful than usual. The strings mark out some pretty tragic sounding chords, whilst varying a bit in dynamics. There are also some French horns and choir to bring in a few short counter melodies and fill out the mix. This takes us into the climactic E section, which has a whole lot going on. It's almost too messy in my opinion, but this is on purpose. That doesn't mean that it can't sound great, but it is very tough to mix. The first order of business is still the piano. We have an octave stacked melody on the right hand, while the left hand plays staccato stabs following the previous chord progression. Towards the end of the section, I've got a quick descent and ascent, which I feel is very emblematic of Final Fantasy 15 or Kingdom Hearts 3. Following the melody on piano are the first violins. This is for a couple of reasons. Not only is this something that Shimomura sometimes does as well, but it also helps to strengthen the melody thanks to the homophony and hide the slow attack of my string library. So I'm killing 3 birds with 1 stone here. The second violins and violas are providing some extra voicings to create some thicker chords, whilst the cellos follow the left hand of the piano. The same percussion floor returns from earlier, minus the triangle. I'm also kinda cheating by having some very subtle taiko drums underneath the timpani here. This helps to give the low end a bit more of a rhythmic boost. It's not very Shimomura to be honest, but it's fine. They're a supporting element. I've also got some more mix-filling counter melodies on French horns and on the choir. These aren't supposed to majorly stand out at all, so I don't mind the thick chords on the choir especially. During the second half of the section, I have some trumpets play some stabs as well. So after that big climax, let's bring things down a bit with another transition here in the F section. We've got 2 goals here. Bring things back to neutral again, both in terms of intensity and the emotional spectrum, and we need to set things up for the loop. I want to loop things back around to the A section, so let's blend this section with some of the elements from the intro. This means that the snare plays its original pattern, and will eventually bring back the ostinato and the pizzicato strings. But first, we're still coming in from the climax section, so I've got an orchestral hit on top of a saw synth pedal note. We're still raised up a whole step from much earlier, so we need to go back to the original tonic. There isn't much going on here harmonically, so we can pretty cleanly just move back down using the saw synth. From here we can just fade it out, as we are pretty much back in the intro for a solid loop. And that's the full track. It's definitely a bit more complicated than previous tutorial tracks that I've done, but hopefully it's not too messy and not too hard to follow. I tried to give this a very Shimomura-esque name, so without further ado, this is Vigorous Struggle. I know that this track is a little bit different from what you usually hear from me on this channel, but I work with so many more genres than just rock. Hopefully I've gotten to showcase that a bit, but more importantly, I hope that this tutorial was informative. I'm not super great at putting musical ideas into words, so I hope that what I just waffled on about made sense. Feel free to ask any questions below. Yoko Shimomura has been one of my favourite composers for decades, so it's been great to properly engage with and research her style. Hopefully you can too, it's really enlightening. I'm still very much knee-deep in soundtrack work for a wealth of game projects at the moment, so please keep staying tuned. I can't share a whole lot of them just yet of course, but I plan to when I can. And I'll once again say to reach out to me if and when you need music for your project, big or small. I'm always ready for even more work. I'm planning to do even more composer deep dives when I have the time, and I'll actually ask for a bit of engagement from you. I'm giving you an option between 3 composers here, so please leave a comment for which one you'd like me to tackle next. Your choices are Yasunori Mitsuda of the Chrono series and Xeno series fame, Jun Senoue of primarily Sonic the Hedgehog fame, or Nobuo Uematsu of primarily Final Fantasy fame. Please leave a vote. Anyway, I really hope that you learned something from this tutorial, so thanks for watching and stay tuned.